Sarah Chen's fingers trembled on her rifle as she stared at the smoking ruins of Outpost 7, Earth's last military stronghold. Bodies of her fellow soldiers lay scattered across the ground. The sound of heavy footsteps made her spin around, pressing her back against the cold metal wall. 3 days. That's how long she had fought alongside her unit against the alien invasion. Now she was the only one left. The footsteps grew louder. Sarah checked her weapon. 2 bullets left. Not enough to fight an entire alien army, but enough to make sure they wouldn't take her alive. A shadow fell across the floor. Sarah held her breath as a massive figure stepped into view. The alien warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, his purple-scaled armor gleaming in the emergency lights. 2 sharp horns curved from his head, and his yellow eyes glowed like burning suns. "Show yourself, human," his deep voice rumbled through the corridor. "I can smell your fear." Sarah's jaw tightened. Fear. She'd show him fear. Without warning, she rolled out of hiding and fired her first shot. The bullet pinged off the alien's armor, leaving barely a scratch. The warrior's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Impressive. Most of your kind try to run. I'm not most of my kind." Sarah spat, aiming her last bullet at his head. Before she could fire, the alien moved with shocking speed. His massive hand knocked the gun away, and Sarah found herself pinned against the wall. "No," he said, studying her face with those burning eyes. "You are not." He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. "I am Commander Vexthor of the Drachnid Empire. And you, little human, have earned the right to live." Sarah struggled against his grip. "I'd rather die fighting." Vexthor's laugh echoed through the corridor. "Who said anything about fighting?" His clawed hand gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You will share my bed as my mate, or you will die. Those are your only choices." Sarah's mind raced. This had to be some kind of sick joke. But as she looked into those alien eyes, she saw no humor there, only cold certainty and something else. Curiosity. Interest. A crazy idea began to form in her mind. The Drachnids had overwhelmed Earth's defenses not through superior technology, but through sheer numbers and unbreakable discipline. If she could get close to one of their commanders. "Well," Vexthor demanded, his grip tightening slightly. "What is your answer?" Sarah forced herself to relax in his hold, letting fear show on her face. Let him think he had broken her. Let him think humans were weak. I want to live," she whispered. Vexthor released her chin and stepped back, satisfaction evident in his posture. "A wise choice. You will learn that life in the Empire can be pleasant for those who know their place." As Sarah followed him through the ruins of the outpost, she caught a glimpse of their reflection in a broken screen. The massive alien warrior, proud and confident, and behind him, a small human woman with fire in her eyes that he couldn't see. She would learn their weaknesses. She would find a way to contact other human survivors. And when the moment was right, the Drachnids would learn that keeping the human as a mate was like welcoming a wolf into their bed. But for now, Sarah kept her head down and played her part. After all, survival was what humans did best. Little did Commander Vexthor know, he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had given a human soldier direct access to the heart of the Drachnid Empire. And Sarah Chen intended to make the most of it. The Drachnid flagship's metal walls seemed to close in around Sarah as she followed a servant to Commander Vexthor's quarters. 1 week had passed since her capture, and she had spent every minute watching, learning, and planning. The servant, a small green-skinned alien with 4 arms, opened a thick door. "The commander awaits you inside," it whispered, head bowed. Sarah stepped into the room and froze. Vexthor stood by a large window, stars streaming past as the ship moved through space. He had removed his armor, revealing purple scales that rippled with each movement. "Come here," he ordered, not turning around. Sarah walked forward, keeping her steps small and hesitant. Let him think she was scared. Her eyes darted around the room, noting the computer terminal in the corner, the weapons rack on the wall, the security cameras watching everything. "You are different from what I expected," Vexthor said, finally facing her. "Most humans we captured begged or screamed. You remain quiet, watchful." Sarah lowered her eyes. "I'm trying to learn my place, Commander." His laugh rumbled through the room. "See, even now you lie beautifully." He stepped closer, towering over her. "Your eyes betray you, little human. They burn with defiance." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Would you prefer a mate who cowers?" "No." Vexthor's clawed hand lifted her chin. "Your spirit intrigues me. Tell me, why do humans question everything? Even our lowest soldiers know better than to question orders." There it was, the opening she needed. Sarah chose her words carefully. "Humans believe choice makes us stronger. When we follow orders, it's because we decide to, not because we have to." Vexthor's yellow eyes narrowed. "Choice is chaos. The Empire functions because every Drachnid knows their role and obeys without question. Yet you question me now," Sarah pointed out. "You wonder why humans are different. Isn't that choice too?" The commander's hand dropped away as if burned. He turned sharply, barking orders at his computer terminal in the Drachnid language. Sarah watched his reflection in the window, noting how his scales had darkened, a sign of distress, she had learned. "You will join me for the evening meal," he said finally. "The other commanders wish to examine you." Sarah bowed slightly. "As you command." That evening, Sarah sat quietly at a table full of Drachnid commanders, each more fearsome than the last. They spoke around her as if she wasn't there, discussing battle plans and troop movements. But she noticed how their eyes kept returning to her, studying the way she ate, moved, and responded to Vexthor. One commander, larger than the rest, leaned forward. "Tell me, human, do all your females show such poor respect? You do not kneel when speaking to superiors." Before Vexthor could respond, Sarah smiled softly. "Forgive me. I'm still learning your ways. Should I kneel now?" The commander's scales rippled with satisfaction. "Yes, demonstrate." "No." Vexthor's voice cut through the room like a blade. "She is my mate, not a common slave. She sits at my side." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inside she smiled. The mighty Drachnid commander had just defied a superior officer's suggestion, something that should have been impossible according to the files she studied. Later, alone in their quarters, Vexthor paced restlessly. "You caused disorder at dinner. The other commanders now question my judgment." "Did I?" Sarah asked innocently. "Or did you make your own choice about how to treat your mate?" Vexthor stopped pacing, his expression troubled. Sarah turned away to hide her triumph. Like a crack in a dam, the first seeds of doubt had been planted. Now she just had to wait for them to grow. In the privacy of her thoughts, Sarah allowed herself a moment of fierce pride. The Drachnids thought they had conquered humanity, but they were about to learn a hard lesson. Never underestimate a human's ability to adapt, observe, and exploit every weakness. The dance of deception had begun, and Sarah Chen was leading. Sarah learned quickly that being a commander's mate came with unexpected freedoms. The Drachnids were so confident in their control that they barely watched her as she wandered the massive flagship's lower levels. Today, she followed the small green-skinned servant she had seen before. The four-armed alien was scrubbing the floors, but Sarah had noticed something odd. It kept cleaning the same spot over and over. "Let me help you," Sarah said, kneeling down. The servant jumped, all four hands trembling. "No, honored mate," it whispered. "Commander Vexthor would not approve." Sarah smiled gently. "What he doesn't know won't hurt him." She grabbed a spare cloth and started cleaning. As she worked, she whispered, "I saw you tapping on the floor. It's a code, isn't it?" The servant froze. Its large eyes darted around the empty corridor before it leaned closer. "How did you?" 3 short taps, 2 long ones, over and over. "That's not cleaning." That's communication. The servant's skin changed color slightly, showing patches of blue. If you tell the commander. I won't. Sarah cut in. I'm not what they think I am. And I need allies. The servant studied her for a long moment before nodding. I am Zix. Come with me, but quietly. They walked through winding service corridors until they reached what looked like a storage room. Zix pressed its hand against a hidden panel, and a section of the wall slid aside. Sarah's eyes widened as she stepped into a secret chamber. At least 20 different aliens huddled inside, some species she had never seen before. They all stared at her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. A tall, insect-like creature stepped forward. I am Crickstal. You risk much by bringing a commander's mate here, Zix. She figured out our code, Zix explained. And she's different. Watch. It turned to Sarah. Tell them what you told me. Sarah straightened her spine. I'm a human soldier. Vexthor thinks he tamed me, but I'm gathering intelligence. I want to help bring down the Empire. Murmurs filled the room. Crickstal's antennae twitched. Brave words, but how can we trust you? Because I discovered something about the Drachnids. Sarah leaned forward. They physically can't disobey orders. It's not training, it's in their bodies. I've been testing it with Vexthor. Something in their genetics forces them to obey superiors. The room went silent. Finally, a small glowing creature floated forward. She speaks truth. I was chief scientist before enslavement. Drachnids are genetically modified to ensure obedience. They cannot resist direct orders from superiors. Then why tell us? Crickstal demanded. What do you want? Because genetic programming can be hacked, Sarah said firmly. If we understand how it works, we might be able to use it against them. But I need your help. I need to know everything about how the Drachnids control their ship, their communication systems, and especially their biology. The gathered aliens exchanged looks. The glowing scientist bobbed excitedly. Yes, with right signal, could trigger obedience response. Make Drachnids obey new masters, or free them completely, Sarah added. Either way, we can bring down their empire from within. Crickstal's compound eyes studied her for a long moment. You risk execution if discovered. Sarah smiled grimly. Better to die fighting than live as a pet. Are you with me? One by one, the aliens stepped forward. Each had a skill, each had knowledge, each had access to different parts of the ship. Together, they might have a chance. As Sarah left the hidden chamber that day, she felt hope for the first time since Earth fell. Vexthor and his empire thought themselves invincible because of their genetic programming. But they were about to learn that their greatest strength could become their greatest weakness. And Sarah Chen would be the one to show them how. Time moved differently aboard the Drachnid flagship. Sarah had been there for a month now, though it felt like years. She sat in the observation deck, watching Vexthor as he reviewed battle reports on his tablet. Another human settlement found, he muttered. Small group, barely worth the effort to capture. Sarah's heart clenched, but she kept her voice casual. What will happen to them? Standard procedure. The strong will serve, the weak will be eliminated. He paused, looking at her. This troubles you. I'm just curious, Sarah said carefully. Who decides what makes someone strong or weak? Vexthor's scales shifted color slightly. The high command, of course. And you never wonder if they might be wrong. The tablet clattered to the floor. Vexthor stood up sharply, his massive frame casting a shadow over her. Wrong. High command cannot be wrong. He stopped, scales darkening in confusion. Sarah pressed her advantage gently. On Earth, even our highest leaders can make mistakes. That's why we question, why we think for ourselves. Silence. Vexthor growled, but his voice lacked its usual force. Your human ideas are poison. Later that day, Sarah noticed other Drachnid warriors watching them in the dining hall. She could see their interest when she spoke freely to Vexthor, when she made choices without waiting for permission. One young warrior approached their table. "Commander, I observe your mate selecting her own food without direction. Is this permitted?" Vexthor opened his mouth to answer, then paused. Sarah could almost see the conflict in his mind. Finally, he said, "She is different. Humans require some freedom to function properly." The warrior's eyes widened. Freedom of choice. But the High Command says, "Return to your post," Vexthor snapped. The warrior obeyed instantly, but Sarah saw him whispering to others afterward. That evening, in their quarters, Vexthor paced restlessly. "You're changing things. The other warriors, they ask questions they should not ask." Sarah sat on their bed, watching him. Is asking questions really so dangerous? Yes. No. He stopped pacing, gripping his head. "When you speak of choice, of thinking differently, it makes my mind feel strange, like static in my skull." Sarah stood and approached him slowly. "That feeling, that's your own thoughts trying to break through your programming. The real you, fighting to be free." Vexthor stared at her with those burning yellow eyes. "There is no real me. I am a warrior of the Empire. I follow orders." "Then why haven't you reported me?" Sarah asked softly. "I question everything. I challenge you. By Empire law, I should be punished. But you choose not to." The word "choose" made him flinch. Sarah watched as his scales rippled with darker colors, a sign of deep distress. She had learned to read his moods well over the past month. "Leave me," he ordered roughly. "I must think." Sarah nodded and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back. "Thinking for yourself, that's a choice too." In the corridor, she let out a shaky breath. The Resistance's scientist had been right. The Drachnid's genetic programming was strong, but it could be weakened. Every day, more warriors watched her with curiosity instead of contempt. Every day, Vexthor struggled more with blind obedience. She made her way to the hidden chamber where Zix waited. "It's working," she whispered. "The warriors are starting to question things." Zix's four hands twisted nervously. "The High Command will notice soon. When they do." "When they do," Sarah said firmly, "we'll be ready. Keep working on that signal device. We're going to need it sooner than we thought." As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The Drachnids had created the perfect soldiers. Obedient, unquestioning, and loyal. But they never considered that loyalty could be shifted, that obedience could be broken by something as simple as doubt. And doubt, like a virus, was spreading through the ranks. The emergency alarms jolted Sarah awake. Red lights flashed through the flagship's corridors as she rushed to the command center. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the tension that filled the air. She found Vexthor standing rigid before a massive view screen. His scales had turned an ashen gray, a color she had never seen before. "What's happening?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Silence," he growled, but his voice trembled. On the screen, images showed a hidden human outpost built into an asteroid. Sarah's heart stopped when she saw children playing in what looked like a schoolroom. A higher-ranking Drachnid commander appeared on the screen. "Commander Vexthor, your orders are simple. Destroy the human nest. No survivors." Sarah's fingers dug into her palms. There had to be at least 1,000 people in that outpost. Families, children, survivors of Earth's fall. "Commander," the superior prompted when Vexthor didn't respond immediately. "Your acknowledgement is required." Vexthor's massive frame swayed slightly. "There are young ones," he said, his voice rough. "They are human vermin," the superior snapped. "Execute your orders immediately." Sarah watched as Vexthor's clawed hand reached for the weapon's control. His fingers trembled. Sweat beaded on his scales. The genetic programming was forcing him to obey, but the doubt she had planted fought against it. "Vexthor," she whispered, not caring who heard. "You have a choice." His hand froze above the controls. The superior's eyes narrowed dangerously. Commander, you will fire on that outpost now. This is a direct order. Vexthor's breathing became ragged. His scales flickered between colors. Gray, purple, almost black. Sarah could see the war raging inside him. Vexthor's voice cracked. I cannot. The command center went deadly silent. The superior's face twisted with rage. What did you say? Those are children, Vexthor said, each word seeming to cause him physical pain. I will not. I choose not to murder children. Treason, the superior roared. Guards, seize the commander and his human mate. Their execution will serve as an example. Everything happened at once. Guards rushed forward. Sarah moved to fight, but Vexthor was faster. He swept her behind him with one arm, while his other hand smashed the weapons console. Run, he growled at her. Not without you. Sarah shot back. She grabbed his arm. The resistance has a safe place. Come with me. For one terrible moment, she thought he would refuse. The programming was trying to make him submit to arrest. But then his eyes met hers, and she saw something new there. True free will. They ran. Alarms blared. Warriors shouted. But Sarah knew every hidden passage thanks to her resistance friends. She led Vexthor through maintenance tunnels and secret corridors until they reached the hidden chamber. Inside, Zix and the others worked frantically at their makeshift equipment. The glowing scientist bobbed excitedly. Signal device almost ready, but need more time. Time is something we don't have, Sarah said grimly. She turned to Vexthor, who stood awkwardly among the aliens he had once ruled. You defied a direct order. You chose mercy over obedience. Why? Vexthor touched his head gently. The static, it's gone. When I chose, truly chose, the programming broke. He looked at her with wonder. Is this how humans feel all the time? This freedom. Before Sarah could answer, new alarms sounded. The superior's voice boomed through the ship. This is your final warning. Surrender the traitors, or this entire sector of the ship will be sealed and vented into space. You have 5 minutes to comply. Sarah met Vexthor's eyes. They both knew what came next would change everything. The real war for freedom was about to begin. 3 minutes until sector venting. The superior's voice boomed through the ship. Sarah looked around the hidden chamber at the terrified faces of the resistance members. Is the signal device ready? She asked the glowing scientist. Yes, but untested. Could kill drachnids. Could do nothing. Cold. We're out of options. Sarah cut in. She turned to Vexthor. The device will broadcast a signal that mimics your High Command's genetic control frequency, but instead of their orders, it will transmit mine. Vexthor's scales rippled. You wish to control us. Like them. No. Sarah touched his arm gently. I want to show every drachnid they have a choice, just like you did. But first, we need time. Will you help us? He studied her face for a long moment before nodding. What must I do? 2 minutes to sector venting, the superior announced. Sarah grabbed the signal device, a mess of wires and stolen parts that looked more like junk than a weapon. Zix, get everyone to the emergency pods. Crickstall, start the evacuation plan. Vexthor, I need you to get me to the ship's main communication array. They will be guarding it, he warned. Sarah smiled grimly. Count on it. They moved fast through the service corridors. Twice they had to hide as guards ran past. When they reached the communication center's entrance, 4 armed warriors stood guard. 1 minute to sector venting. Any ideas? Sarah whispered. Instead of answering, Vexthor stepped into view. The guards raised their weapons, then hesitated when they recognized him. Commander, one asked uncertainly. Your orders were to arrest me, Vexthor said, his voice ringing with authority. Tell me, why do you obey without question? What if those orders are wrong? The guards shifted uncomfortably. Sarah could see doubt in their eyes. The same doubt she had carefully planted throughout the ship for weeks. 30 seconds to sector venting. Choose, Vexthor told them. Choose for yourselves. One guard lowered his weapon, then another. The third kept his rifle up, but his hands shook. The fourth looked between his comrades in confusion. Sarah didn't wait. She sprinted past them to the communication array, Vexthor right behind her. Inside, she plugged the signal device into the ship's systems. 10 seconds to sector venting. The device hummed to life. Sarah's fingers flew over the controls, remembering everything the scientist had taught her. I hope this works, she muttered. 5 seconds. 4. 3. Sarah slammed the final button. A high-pitched tone filled the air. Every drachnid in the room stiffened, including Vexthor. Their scales flickered rapidly between colors. 2. 1. The superior's voice cut off. For a moment, complete silence filled the ship. Then Sarah spoke into the communication system, her voice broadcasting to every deck. People of the Drachnid Empire, for generations, you have been slaves to your genetic programming. You were told this made you strong. But true strength comes from choice. Like Commander Vexthor, you can choose to be more than what they made you. Choose now. Choose freedom. The signal pulsed through the ship. Sarah watched anxiously as Vexthor and the guards trembled, fighting against years of conditioning. The scientist had warned her, this could kill them all. But then Vexthor straightened. His scales settled into a new color, a deep blue she had never seen before. The guards followed, each displaying the same transformation. The static, one guard whispered, "It's quiet." Across the ship, Sarah heard cheering. On the security screens, she saw Drachnid warriors helping resistance members out of hiding. Others were arresting the officers who had supported the high command. Vexthor moved to the controls and opened a channel to the human outpost. "This is Commander Vexthor. Your people are safe. The revolution has begun." Sarah leaned against him, exhausted but triumphant. "What does this new color mean?" she asked, touching his blue scales. "Freedom," he replied simply. "We have much to learn about being free. Will you teach us?" Sarah nodded, watching as more warriors arrived, their scales all showing the same brilliant blue. The real war was just beginning, but the first battle had been won. Humanity hadn't just survived, they had shown an entire empire a better way to live. Victory was short-lived. Sarah sat in the flagship's medical bay, watching as another Drachnid warrior collapsed, his scales turning a sickly gray. "How many?" she asked the glowing scientist, who hovered anxiously nearby. 37 cases of total neural failure, it reported sadly. The signal freed their minds, but their bodies fight the change. Some adapt, others. Sarah closed her eyes. The revolution had spread across the Drachnid fleet, but freedom was killing them. Their bodies had been engineered to need the genetic programming. Like a drug, they couldn't quit safely. Vexthor entered the medical bay, his blue scales now streaked with tired gray. 3 more ships have joined our cause, he reported. But we lose warriors every hour. Their systems cannot handle the freedom. The scientist bobbed excitedly. Found possible solution. But cost is high. Sarah straightened. Tell me. Massive electromagnetic pulse, targeted to specific Drachnid genetic frequency, would erase all programming permanently. But the scientist's glow dimmed. Pulse would be traumatic. Many would die. Survivors would need to learn everything again. How to walk, speak, think. How many would die? Sarah asked quietly. Estimate 30% chance of survival. Maybe less. Vexthor's scales darkened. So we choose between slow death for all or quick death for most, with survivors reduced to infants. Sarah stood and paced the room. The weight of the decision crushed down on her. She had wanted to free the Drachnids, not commit genocide. But watching them die slowly, their minds free but bodies failing. There has to be another way, she whispered. The medical bay door slid open. Zix hurried in, all 4 arms carrying data tablets. News from other ships. High Command sending main fleet. They say they will destroy all infected vessels to stop the spread of disobedience. Sarah's heart sank. They were out of time. How long do we have? Vex Thor asked. 2 hours, Zix replied. Maybe less. Sarah looked at the sick warriors in their beds. Some had been guards, others engineers, all of them now fighting for the right to think freely. She thought of the children in the human outpost, of all the enslaved species waiting for freedom. If we do nothing, everyone dies, she said slowly. If we use the pulse. She turned to the scientist. Can you modify it? Target only willing volunteers. The scientist brightened. Yes, could create safe zones. Those who choose can shelter from pulse. Then we give them a choice, Sarah said firmly. We tell every drachnid the truth, the risks, the costs, everything. Let them decide for themselves. Vexthor touched her arm. And me. Would you have me hide in a safe zone while my warriors face this risk? Sarah looked up at him, seeing the same fierce spirit that had first defied programming for her. That's your choice to make. The next hour passed in a blur. The scientist modified the pulse device while Sarah and Vexthor broadcast the truth to every ship. They explained the options. Retreat to safe zones and keep the programming, or stay and risk everything for true freedom. To Sarah's amazement, most chose to stay. Warriors helped their sick comrades to the pulse transmission points. Those few who chose safety were transported away without judgment. In the control room, Sarah looked at the device that would either free or kill thousands. Last chance to take shelter, she told Vexthor. He stood tall, his scales the deep blue of freedom. My place is here. Whatever comes, we face it together. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. She had started this revolution to save humanity. Now she could only pray she hadn't doomed an entire species in the process. Her hand hovered over the activation switch. The High Command's fleet appeared on their scanners, weapons charged. It was time to learn the true price of freedom. All ships in position, Zix reported, its 4 hands dancing across the control panels. High Command fleet approaching weapon range. Sarah's finger rested on the pulse trigger. Around her, drachnid warriors stood at their posts, scales shimmering with that deep blue of freedom. They had made their choice. Now she had to make hers. Enemy ships charging main weapons, someone called out. They're targeting the human outpost first, another voice added. Sarah's jaw tightened. Of course the High Command would target the humans first. They blamed humans for spreading the disease of free will. Last chance, she said to the room. Anyone who wants to reach a safe zone. We stay, Vexthor's voice rang out. Other warriors echoed him, their voices joining in a chorus of defiance. The first enemy shot streaked across space. Sarah closed her eyes and pressed the trigger. The pulse rippled out from their ship, invisible but powerful. It spread in a wave, catching both rebel and enemy ships in its reach. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screaming began. All around her, drachnid warriors collapsed. Some thrashed in agony, others went frighteningly still. Vexthor fell to his knees, his scales flickering through every color imaginable. Sarah caught him before he could hit the floor. Stay with me, she begged. Fight it. Through the view screen, she watched enemy ships spiral out of control as their crews succumbed to the pulse. The massive fleet that had seemed so threatening moments ago now drifted harmlessly in space. Hours passed like years. Sarah moved from warrior to warrior, checking vital signs, offering water, whispering encouragement. Some never moved again. Others woke confused, like newborns seeing the world for the first time. Vexthor was among the first to recover consciousness. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on Sarah with difficulty. Can you understand me? She asked softly. He blinked several times. When he spoke, his voice was rough, but clear. Sarah, I remember you. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Around them, more warriors were waking up. Some had to be taught to walk again. Others stared at their hands like they'd never seen them before. But their scales showed colors Sarah had never seen before, brilliant swirls that seemed to dance across their skin. The glowing scientist bobbed excitedly nearby. Extraordinary. Neural pathways completely rebuilt. They are truly free now. No trace of programming remains. Reports began coming in from other ships. The survival rate was higher than expected. Nearly half had made it through the pulse. Those who woke were changed, but alive. Truly alive, for the first time. A young warrior approached Sarah on shaky legs. His scales rippled with new colors as he struggled to speak. "I feel everything," he managed. "So much. Too much." "That's normal," Sarah assured him. "You're feeling emotions without the programming controlling them. You'll learn to handle it." More survivors gathered around them, each displaying new colors, new movements, new ways of expressing themselves. They were like children discovering their own bodies, their own minds. Vexthor watched his warriors with wonder. "We were never meant to be just soldiers," he said quietly. "Look at them. Artists, thinkers, dreamers. We had so much locked away inside us." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And now you can be anything you choose." A message flashed on the main screen. Ships approaching. But these weren't enemies. The human outpost had sent vessels to help, along with medical teams from other alien races. They came not to fight, but to heal. Sarah looked at the survivors around her. Not just warriors now, but people learning to be themselves for the first time. The cost had been high, but the prize was beyond measure. The age of the mindless Drachnid army was over. The age of free Drachnids had begun. 6 months after the Great Pulse, Earth was alive again. Sarah stood on a balcony overlooking New Jakarta, watching as humans and Drachnids worked together to rebuild the city. The sight still amazed her every day. "The education center is ready," Vexthor said, joining her at the railing. His scales shimmered with peaceful greens and golds, colors that would have been impossible under the old programming. "How are the students doing?" Sarah asked. "Better each day. The younger ones adapt quickly. The veterans." He paused, his scales flickering briefly with remembered pain. "It is harder for them, but they learn." Below them, a Drachnid child chased a human boy through the streets, both laughing. Their parents, one human, one Drachnid, watched nearby, talking easily together. Such scenes were becoming common now. "The council meeting starts soon," Sarah reminded him. After the revolution, the survivors had formed a new government, one where all species had equal voice. They walked together through the rebuilt halls of the old Earth Defense Building. Aliens of every kind nodded respectfully as they passed. Inside the council chamber, Sarah saw familiar faces. Zix, now representing the free servant races. Crystal, speaking for the insect species. The glowing scientist, who had become vital in helping Drachnids understand their new biology. "Today's agenda," Zix announced, all 4 arms holding different data tablets, includes the integration program for newly awakened Drachnids. 3 more stasis ships were found last week. Sarah smiled at that. They were still discovering ships where Drachnids had chosen to wait in stasis rather than face the pulse. Each group that woke brought new challenges, but also new possibilities. "There is also," Vexthor added, his scales shifting to formal purple, "the matter of the human marriage proposal." The room grew quiet. Humans and Drachnids had worked together, lived together, but marriage between species had remained a delicate topic. "The first request comes from Commander Lin of the Earth Defense Force, Zix read, and former High Guard Kitol of the Free Drachnid Fleet." Sarah felt Vexthor's hand slip into hers under the table. His scales rippled with subtle patterns, a new language of emotion that had developed after the pulse. "If we approve this," someone said, "others will follow." "Good," Sarah replied firmly. "Love is love. Freedom means choosing who to share your life with." The council voted unanimously to approve. As cheers filled the chamber, Sarah remembered that day so long ago when Vexthor had given her a choice. Share his bed or die. You're thinking about the past, Vexthor said softly. His scales showed he was remembering too. About choices, she corrected. You gave me one, even if you didn't mean to. That small crack in your programming changed everything. He touched her face gently. You showed us that strength comes not from blind obedience, but from choosing to stand together. My people owe you their souls. No, Sarah shook her head. You freed yourselves. All I did was show you the door. The council meeting continued, discussing trade routes and cultural exchange programs. Sarah watched the former enemies working together and felt pride swell in her chest. Humanity hadn't just survived. They had helped create something new and beautiful. Later that night, Sarah and Vexthor stood on their balcony again, watching the sun set over the rebuilt city. His scales glowed with the deep blue of freedom, mixed with the soft pink of love, a color he had discovered he could make only after the pulse. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Choosing freedom. Vexthor pulled her close. Never. Some choices remake the universe. You taught me that. Below them, the city hummed with life. Humans and drachnids walked together under the stars, each choosing their own path, writing their own story. The age of empires and slaves was over. The age of freedom had begun.